My name is Frank MacAllister. I'm 64 years old, and I'm a relic, a dinosaur wandering through a world that no longer speaks my language. I'm the CEO of MacAllister Heavy Industries in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. We don't make apps. We take raw iron ore, melt it down until it screams, and pour it into molds that become the skeletons of skyscrapers and the spines of bridges that carry human beings across gulfs they cannot swim. I started this company in 1980 with a loan from my father-in-law and a single blast furnace that was held together by duct tape, prayer, and sheer stubbornness. 40 years later, we were the largest independent steel fabricator in the Rust Belt. I had 400 employees, men and women with mortgages, kids in college, and bad backs. I knew the names of their spouses. I knew which ones were recovering alcoholics and which ones were cheating on their diets. I sponsored the factory softball team and attended the weddings of their daughters. But I didn't know the man sitting across from me at my own Sunday dinner table. His name was Julian Thorne. He was 34, exactly half my age plus 2 years, but he looked like he had been born in a Brooks Brothers catalog and never left the showroom. He had teeth that were too white and hands that were too soft, the hands of someone who had never gripped anything heavier than a fountain pen. But my daughter, Sarah, looked at him like he had hung the moon and painted the stars. Sarah was my Achilles heel. My wife, Martha, passed away when Sarah was 12, ovarian cancer that took her in 6 months. It was the kind of cancer that doesn't care how much money you have or how many doctors you can afford. It was the kind of cancer that leaves a father with a hole in his chest the size of a steel ingot. Since Martha died, Sarah had been the center of my universe. She was brilliant, kind, and artistic in a way that seemed impossible for someone raised in a steel town. She ran the MacAllister Foundation, handling our charitable giving, scholarships for the children of steelworkers, funding for the local food bank, grants for the arts. She saw the best in people. I saw the angles. "The steel industry is ripe for disruption, Frank," Julian said, swirling a glass of my best Cabernet like he was aerating a chemistry experiment. We were in my dining room, the same room where Martha and I had hosted 1,000 dinners. The room still smelled like her, lavender from the sachets she kept in the closet. "You're sitting on significant equity, but your liquidity is tied up in inventory. It's an outdated model." I cut my steak. I liked my steak rare, with just a touch of salt. Julian was eating the salmon, cutting it into tiny, precise pieces. Everything about him was precise and wrong. "We don't do just-in-time manufacturing, Julian," I said, keeping my voice level the way you keep your voice level when you're talking to someone you don't trust. "If a bridge collapses in Ohio, they need a replacement girder today. Not in 6 weeks when a ship arrives from China. We keep inventory because inventory is safety. Safety is expensive," Julian countered, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes were blue, but the blue of Arctic ice, beautiful but devoid of warmth. "Efficiency is profitable." Sarah squeezed his hand. "Dad, please, Julian is just trying to help. He has an MBA from Wharton. I have a degree from the School of Hard Knocks," I grumbled. "And I know that you can't build a bridge out of a spreadsheet." "That's exactly the problem," Julian said smoothly. "You're emotionally attached to your business." I wanted to throw him out then. I should have trusted the hair on the back of my neck that stood up every time he entered the room, that primitive instinct that exists in every man as a warning system for snakes. But Sarah was happy. She was 30 and she wanted a family. She wanted what Martha and I had built together, a partnership, a life, children at the dinner table. They were married 6 months later. It was a lavish affair at the Botanical Gardens. I paid for it. $150,000 for flowers flown in from New York, a band that had played for senators and CEOs, and a catered meal that cost more than my first house. The catering bill alone was $28,000. I walked Sarah down the aisle. She was trembling with joy, her hand shaking as it rested on my arm. She was wearing Martha's wedding dress, altered slightly to fit her frame. As I walked her toward Julian, I could feel Martha there, in the air, in the light coming through the stained glass windows. At the altar, I shook Julian's hand. "Take care of her," I told him. It wasn't a request, it was a command. "With my life, Frank," he said. He lied before the priest had even opened the Bible. The infiltration began 6 months after the wedding. Julian had quit his consulting firm. He told Sarah he wanted to stop traveling, to settle down in Pittsburgh and start a family. He said he was tired of the rat race, that he wanted to build something real with her. I don't know when I started noticing that he was the rat. "He wants to work for you, Dad," Sarah told me in my office one rainy Tuesday. She was sitting in the leather chair across from my desk, the same chair where Martha used to sit. "I have a CFO," I said, not looking up from the quarterly reports. "Tom Miller. He's been with me for 20 years. Tom is 60, Dad. He had that heart scare last year. He wants to retire." He told Julian as much at the Christmas party. Julian has been researching succession plans. I looked up at her. She was glowing. She was pregnant. She was happy in a way I hadn't seen her since Martha was alive. "I have a CFO," I repeated, but the words were already hollow. "Julian can step in," Sarah continued, leaning forward, her hands clasped in front of her belly. "He can learn the business from Tom, please." I loved my daughter more than I loved my pride. I loved her more than I loved my instincts. I hired Julian as the chief financial officer. For the first year, I have to admit he was competent. He was terrifyingly competent. He digitized our payroll system, saving us 15% on administrative costs. He renegotiated our insurance premiums, getting us better rates by playing 3 insurance companies against each other. The marketing materials came back sleek and professional. The numbers looked great. The board of directors, mostly old friends of mine, were impressed. "The kid's a wizard, Frank," said Dutch, my operations manager, over beers at McGillicuddy's on a Friday night. Dutch was built like a cement truck and had been with me since the beginning. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the culture began to change. It started with the coffee. For 30 years, we had free coffee in the break room. It was nothing fancy, just a commercial machine that brewed strong, bitter coffee in 30-gallon urns. The steelworkers would grab a cup before their shift, and sometimes again during their break. It was a small thing, but it was a gesture. Julian replaced it with a vending machine that charged $1 per cup. "It saves us $12,000 a year," Julian argued when I confronted him about it, showing me a cost-benefit analysis he had printed out and laminated. "That's money that can go to the bottom line." "It costs us morale," I roared. "These men work 12-hour shifts in 100-degree heat. They come out of those blast furnaces and they want a cup of coffee." He relented on the coffee. Because he knew I was watching now, but he won on the personnel. One by one, the old guard began to disappear. Mrs. Julian told her that the new software system didn't require a human interface. She cried in my office, but her severance package, which I forced Julian to increase, was decent. Tom Miller was encouraged to take early retirement. Julianne presented him with a golden parachute that was actually reasonable, but the implication was clear. "You're old, and we're replacing you with someone who thinks like this generation." In their place, Julian hired a phalanx of young analysts. They were bright, I'll give him that. They had degrees from good schools. But they wore slim-fit suits and worked in a glass-walled strategy center Julian built on the second floor. They never went down to the factory floor. They never shook a welder's hand. They never watched a man pour molten steel and understand in their bones, what it meant to create something real. The first real incident happened 18 months in. I was walking the floor with Dutch. We were inspecting a custom order for a suspension bridge in West Virginia. The tension cables were anchored by massive steel bolts, each one weighing 50 pounds, forged from high-tensile alloy that had to withstand pressures equivalent to the weight of 1,000 cars hanging from a single thread of metal. "Mac, come look at this," Dutch said, waving me over to the testing rig. He had worry lines creasing his forehead. In the background, the furnace roared. A bolt had snapped during the stress test. It hadn't just bent, it had shattered like glass, breaking into fragments the size of fists. "That's impossible," I said, picking up a jagged shard. The metal was cold in my hand. It was supposed to be warm, ductile, resilient. Instead, it felt brittle. "This is grade 8 alloy. It should withstand 50 tons of pressure without breaking a sweat." "It snapped at 30, Dutch said grimly, handing me the test report. "And look at the grain structure inside. It's porous. There are air pockets." I examined the fractured face of the bolt under the magnifying glass Dutch provided. He was right. The grain was all wrong. It should have been smooth, uniform, beautiful, the result of precise heating and cooling cycles. Instead, it looked like someone had melted down used parts and recast them. I asked. 300, Dutch said quietly. "They're all from this batch. New supplier. Julian contracted them 3 weeks ago. Some company called Apex Global Materials." I marched up to Julian's office. He was on the phone, laughing about something. When I entered without knocking, he hung up quickly. "We have a problem with the West Virginia order," I said, slamming the broken bolt on his glass desk. It left a small dent. "The steel is garbage." Julian didn't flinch. He was good at not flinching. He typed something on his keyboard. "We sourced that batch from a new supplier, Apex Global Materials. They came in 20% under the domestic price." I asked, feeling the first tendrils of real anger curling up my spine. "They're an aggregator," Julian said, still not looking at me. "They source from multiple foundries across Asia and Europe." "It's efficient, Frank," I yelled, loud enough that his secretary stuck her head in. "If that bolt had snapped on the bridge, people would have died. People weigh more than steel. They weigh hope and family and futures. Cancel the contract. Go back to U.S. Steel." "We can't," Julian said, finally looking at me with those ice-blue eyes. "We signed a 2-year exclusive contract with Apex." I stared at him. "You signed an exclusive contract with a vendor I've never heard of without running it by me." "I have autonomy over procurement, Frank," he said, his voice taking on a patient tone, like he was explaining something to a child. "It's in my contract." I felt a cold knot in my stomach. The steel was bad. The bolt was proof of that. But the contract was ironclad. "Get me a replacement bolt," I told Dutch. "Cast it in-house. Use our own steel, even if it takes a week. I don't care." But that wasn't the only problem. The next week, I got a call from Jerry Martinez, one of my supervisors on the warehouse crew. Jerry was a good man, honest, hard-working, had been with me for 15 years. "Mr. Mac," he said, his voice quiet on the phone. "Can we talk?" We met in my truck at lunch. I asked. "It's my paycheck," he said, not making eye contact. "I got my direct deposit statement yesterday." "A reduction? Nobody told me about a reduction." "That's just it, sir. I don't know. The amount is $300 a week less than it should be." My hands clenched on the steering wheel. "Nothing, sir. I do exactly what I've been doing. They just reduced my pay. And when I tried to push back, they told me I was lucky to have the job at all. A guy in the strategy center, one of the young analysts." I felt something burning in my chest. That afternoon, I went to the payroll records. I asked the new HR director, a woman named Patricia who had been hired to replace Mrs. Higgins, to pull a list of all salary changes in the last 3 months. "I'm not sure I can do that, Mr. MacAllister," she said, looking uncomfortable. "Mr. Thorne handles all the personnel changes." He said, "I don't care what he said," I interrupted. "He works for me." The list was 4 pages long. 23 employees had received salary cuts ranging from 5% to 15%. I knew every one of these people. I knew that Jerry Martinez had a daughter in college. I knew that Robert Chen, the shift foreman, had just bought a house. I knew that Margaret Sullivan, who managed the quality control office, had a grandchild with special needs that required expensive therapy. And I knew that their salaries had been cut without their knowledge or consent. I stormed into Julian's office. I demanded, throwing the printout on his desk. Julian leaned back in his chair. He looked completely unruffled. Strategic headcount optimization. The HR director said you ordered her not to discuss it in detail. Julian stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the factory floor, where the furnaces glowed orange in the afternoon light. When he turned back to me, there was something different in his expression. The mask had slipped. I saw something cold underneath. "Frank, let's be honest," he said. "These people work in a dying industry. Manufacturing is moving overseas. These jobs are dinosaurs." "These are my people," I said, my voice very quiet. "They're expenses," he replied. "I fired him that day. I walked him out of the building myself. But when I tried to remove him from the system, I found out that he had changed his passwords. I found out that he had created backdoor access to the financial systems. I found out that he had, very deliberately, made himself essential to the company's operations. It took lawyers 3 weeks to force him out. I couldn't tell Sarah. Not yet. She was pregnant, due in 5 months. The stress would be bad for the baby. But I knew something was very wrong. I started to watch him more carefully. I stopped going home at 5 p.m. I told Sarah I had late meetings. Instead, I sat in my office with the lights off, watching the reflection of Julian's office in the glass of the hallway. From my vantage point, I could see him working late, long after everyone else had gone home. But he wasn't working. He was on the phone. He spoke in low, hushed tones. Sometimes he laughed. A laugh I never heard when he was with Sarah. A laugh that sounded like a stranger's. One night, I followed him when he left the office. He parked in the underground garage and took the private elevator up. I waited in the lobby for 40 minutes. Then he came back down. He was with a woman. She was blonde, beautiful, wearing clothes that cost more than my first car. She kissed him goodbye on the mouth, right there in the lobby, in front of the security cameras. Then she handed him an envelope. He opened it slightly, saw what was inside. Cash, it looked like, and pocketed it. The next morning, I called an old friend from the VFW, a guy named Sal. Sal knew people. He introduced me to Vinny the Lens Moretti. He smoked cheap cigars and charged expensive rates and got results. "I need you to follow my son-in-law," I told Vinny, handing him a thick envelope of cash in a diner booth that smelled like bacon grease and broken dreams. Vinny asked, lighting a cigar. "Stealing," I said. Vinny went to work. 2 weeks passed. The atmosphere at home was poisonous. Sarah was stressed. She was trying to get pregnant, but it wasn't happening. The doctors said there was no physical problem. Sometimes the doctors said, it just takes time. But I knew the real problem was that Julian was cold to her. He was supportive in public, but cold in private. He rarely came home. When he did, he smelled like expensive perfume. He told Sarah that I was the problem, that my meddling and senile refusal to modernize were putting the company at risk. "He says you're ruining the company, Dad," Sarah told me, crying in my kitchen one evening. She was 7 months pregnant now, and the pregnancy was hard on her. Her ankles were swollen, her back hurt. She looked terrified. "He showed me the books. They're in the red. We are profitable, Sarah," I insisted, taking her hands. "We were profitable when he arrived. He showed me the books, Dad." That's when I knew for certain he was cooking the books. He wasn't just stealing. He was creating a narrative of failure so that when the company collapsed, he could blame it on the economy and legacy inefficiencies and walk away with the loot. I called an independent auditor the next morning. Vinny called me on a Thursday night at 11:47 p.m. I was in my study, pretending to read. "Mac, you need to come see this," he said without preamble. I met him in a parking lot across from a luxury high-rise in the Shadyside district, the kind of building where the doorman wears a top hat and the lobby looks like a museum. The building was 40 stories of glass and steel, and every window glowed like a jewel box. I asked. "Penthouse B," Vinny said. "He goes there every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon." Vinny handed me a dossier. Her name is Veronica Vane, 26 years old. Art consultant, according to her LinkedIn profile. But she doesn't sell much art. I looked at the photo. She was beautiful, I have to admit. Sharp features, blonde hair, the kind of expensive look that comes from spending money on the right things. Hair salon, gym, designer clothes. She had a predatory beauty, the beauty of something with claws. I asked. She moved to Pittsburgh 6 months ago. She came from New York, before that Miami, before that Los Angeles. "Here's the kicker, Mac," Vinny said, pointing to a document in the dossier. I pulled the property records for the building. The penthouse was bought 6 months ago. Cash, $8 million. It was a holding company called Apex Global Management. The circle closed. Julian was using the fake steel supplier to siphon money out of my company, and using that money to buy a love nest for his mistress. He was literally building his affair out of the ruins of my life's work. "There's more," Vinny said, handing me another file. I traced the company. It's registered in Delaware. The registered agent is a lawyer. The beneficial owner is listed as J. "Arrogance," Vinny said, lighting another cigar. I needed one more thing. I needed the communications. I needed the proof that a jury could see. The following Sunday we had a family barbecue. My brother was there with his kids. Some of Sarah's friends came. It was supposed to be a celebration of the pregnancy, a happy family moment. Julian was manning the grill, playing the part of the perfect husband. He had his phone, his sleek corporate iPhone with the platinum case, on the tray next to the burgers. But I knew from Vinny that he had 2 phones. While Julian was flipping burgers and charming my neighbors, telling a story about a successful merger he had orchestrated, Sarah went inside to rest. Her feet hurt. Her back was killing her. I went into the mudroom. I found his gym bag, the one he carried to the gym every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. I dug through the sweaty clothes. He had left them deliberately dirty, trying to create a paper trail of a fitness routine that didn't exist. At the bottom, wrapped in a towel, was a cheap prepaid Nokia phone. Basic model, the kind you can buy at a gas station without showing ID. I opened it. No passcode. He was that arrogant. The texts were damning. To Veronica, "Just another month, baby. The old man is clueless." To Veronica, "Done this morning. $500K. The West Virginia project bonus that never existed. We're going to Brazil in October." To Veronica, "God, I hate these people. Sarah is so pathetic, always crying about the baby, always worried about her dad. I married her because of the company. If I'd known there was an easier mark, I would have... There it stopped. The message was incomplete, and I didn't need to read more. To Veronica, when we're already gone. When she's got nothing left but a broken company and a broken heart. The prenup is airtight. She signed exactly what I wanted her to sign. I get half the company, her trust fund, and the house in Aspen. I took photos of every text with my own phone. I put the burner back exactly as I found it, placing it the same way it had been resting in the towel. I walked out to the patio. Julian smiled at me, that smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Burger, Frank?" "Thanks, Julian," I said, taking the plate. My hands were steady, but inside, something had crystallized. That week, I began to see the real damage that Julian had done. I called Jerry Martinez into my office. I closed the door. I told him that I knew about the salary cut. "I'm going to reverse it," I said. "I'm going to go back 3 months and give you the money that was taken." Jerry's eyes filled with tears. He nodded. "Maybe 40 people, sir, maybe more. They told us the company was restructuring. The analysts, the young guys in the glass office. Mister, I went through the payroll system manually. It took me 16 hours, but I found 47 employees who had received cuts without being properly notified. The average cut was $4,000 per month. Over 3 months, that was $588,000 that had been stripped from the paychecks of hardworking people to line Julian's pockets. I also found something else. Payments to consulting companies that didn't exist. $50,000 here, $75,000 there. Over the course of a year, there were 17 consulting invoices totaling $892,000. The invoices were from companies like Strategic Innovations LLC, Operational Excellence Consulting, and Digital Transformation Partners. None of them existed. They were all payments to offshore accounts controlled by Julian and Veronica. I called Vinny again. We met at the same diner. "I need you to get me everything," I told him. "I need bank statements. I need every place that money went." "This is going to be extensive, Mac," Vinny said. "I know," I said. The hardest part was telling Sarah. 2 days before I planned to have the trap sprung, I went to her house. She was alone. Julian was at the office. He was at the penthouse in Shadyside, but I didn't tell her that. She was lying on the couch, her pregnant belly rising and falling as she breathed. She looked exhausted. She looked like someone who knew something was wrong but didn't want to know it. "Sarah, sit up," I said. She struggled to her feet. I helped her. I sat her down at the kitchen table. "I need you to be very strong right now," I told her. I didn't say a word. I just placed the phone on the table, the burner phone. I placed the photos next to it. She picked up the phone with trembling hands. She started reading the texts. Her face went white, then red. Then she went to the sink and threw up. When she came back wiping her mouth, she looked at me. "Destroy him," she said. Friday morning, 9 a.m. The boardroom on the second floor. I had called an emergency board meeting. The board was assembled. Dutch, the operations manager. Tom Miller, my former CFO, who I had rehired as a consultant. Myself, and the 3 external board members, a lawyer, a banker, and an accountant from outside the company. I also had Vinny waiting in a conference room down the hall, and I had already called the FBI. Julian arrived at 8:55 a.m. He was wearing a new Italian suit, custom-tailored, probably $4,000. He looked confident. He looked like a man who thought he was winning. "Good morning, gentlemen," he said, taking a seat at the head of the table. He pulled out his tablet. "I assume this is about the quarterly projections. I have some excellent news about the efficiency improvements. Sit down," I said. "I am sitting," he replied smoothly. Then sit down further. Shut up. The arrogance drained from his face just slightly. I placed a stack of documents on the table. Bank records, invoices, screenshots of the texts, property deeds, airline bookings, everything. For the past year, you've been embezzling money from MacAllister Heavy Industries, I said, my voice very quiet. You created shell companies. You inflated vendor bills, you cut employee salaries and pocketed the difference. You purchased luxury property using company funds. You created fake consulting invoices. Julian laughed. It was a high-pitched, nervous laugh. This is insane. You're an old man who doesn't understand how modern business works. These are standard strategic maneuvers. This is federal wire fraud, I interrupted. This is embezzlement. This is conspiracy. I pressed a button on my phone. The door to the boardroom opened. 2 FBI agents and a team of local police entered. They were not in a rush. They had done this many times before. Said the lead agent, a woman named Special Agent Morrison. Julian stood up. His face had gone pale. You can't do this. I'm the CFO. Not to commit fraud, Agent Morrison said, pulling out handcuffs. You have the right to remain silent. Julian looked at me. He looked at Dutch. He looked at each member of the board. When he saw them all looking back at him with disgust, something broke in his eyes. I want a lawyer, he said. You'll get one, Agent Morrison said. As they cuffed him, he looked at me again. Sarah, don't you dare speak her name, I said. They took him out. The handcuffs clicked. The door closed. The boardroom was silent. The trial took 8 months. Julian's lawyers fought hard. But the evidence was too solid. The texts were too damning. Veronica, when faced with a choice between conspiracy charges and testifying against Julian, chose to testify. She admitted to everything. She admitted that she had helped create the shell companies. She admitted that they had planned to flee to Brazil and establish a new life under assumed names. Julian got 15 years. Veronica got 5 for conspiracy. The property in Shadyside was seized and sold. We recovered about 60% of the stolen funds. It was better than I had expected, but it still left a gap. Sarah didn't date for a long time after that. She threw herself into the business. She learned to read a balance sheet. She learned to weld. Dutch taught her. She learned to understand the smell of molten steel and what it meant. She had the baby, a boy, in December. She named him Leo, after Martha's father. 2 years later, Sarah became the CEO of MacAllister Heavy Industries. She was the first thing that changed. She restored the coffee machine. She invited every employee who had taken a salary cut into her office and gave them back pay with interest. She rehired Mrs. Higgins as a special consultant. She tore down the glass walls of the strategy center and converted it into a training facility for new welders. She was good at the job. She was fair. She had her grandfather's steel and her mother's heart. Today, when I walk the factory floor, I smell the ozone and the sulfur and the cutting fluid. I smell the honest work of men and women who know their worth. I'm retired now, mostly. I come in on Tuesdays to drink the free coffee and watch the operation. Sarah runs it now. She's tough, she's fair, and she has a bullshit detector that works better than radar. Sometimes, when the rain hits the metal roof of the factory, I think about Julian sitting in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. I hope he realizes something that I tried to tell him on day 1. Iron bends, steel breaks. But family? Family is the anvil. You can hammer on it all you want, but it only gets harder. 5 years later, the MacAllister Foundation had doubled in size. Sarah was on the board of the Pittsburgh Chamber of Commerce. She had won the Entrepreneur of the Year award from the local business association. But that wasn't what mattered to her. What mattered to her was that Jerry Martinez's daughter graduated from college with a degree in engineering. What mattered was that Robert Chen's house was paid off. What mattered was that Margaret Sullivan's grandchild got the treatment he needed and was thriving in school. What mattered was that the people who worked in the factory, the real workers, the ones who poured the steel and cut the beams and made sure that bridges stood, knew that they were valued, that their work mattered, that they were more than expenses on a spreadsheet. I sat in the bleachers at Leo's Little League game, watching him hit a triple. He was 7 years old, and he had his mother's grace and his grandfather's obstinacy. He rounded the bases. His father, Sarah, had remarried to a good man named Robert, cheering from the stands. Sarah sat next to me. She was wearing a MacAllister Industries polo shirt. She looked happy. "You did good, Dad," she said, taking my hand. "You did good," I replied. We sat there in the autumn sun, watching Leo slide into home base, safe. That's all that matters. That's all that ever matters.